Rosemary Kinuthia is the executive director of the African Boy Child Network in Kenya. Her nonprofit organization advocates and promotes the well-being of boys by engaging in grassroots activity like mentorship and educational opportunities for boys.
I'm the founder and director of African Boy Child Network, and I'm glad to be one of the speakers, and I'm also glad to have heard what other speakers have talked about. And I think this is a very sensitive discussion we're having today. And I agree with a lot of our speakers of today that the media has a way of forming perceptions of society. And one of the things is, and I would not want to probably repeat what other speakers have talked about, but the biggest question I would want to ask us is who owns the media? I know I've done a presentation, but I think a lot of those things might have been, I would not want to repeat. So allow me to just, I think DeMarco, you can just keep tapping as I go. The big question is who owns this media? And we need to acknowledge the fact that media, most of the directors or the owners of these media stations actually men. And I want to be corrected if I say even 80% of media owners from Africa actually men. Majority of judges of custody actually men. Majority of leaders that actually do policies, bias policies that actually influence policies actually men. So at times it's good to even ask ourselves, what is it that we are doing wrong? That the issue of men is become so bad that even the men in the media choose to ignore their own to the presentation. Of course, African Boy Child Network is an African NGO. Our mission is beheading sustainable of the boy child. One is basic world free of gender inequality, because we all know that the issues of gender is very hypocritical across the world, and you're actually getting affected by it. Now, the other thing is, how has the media shaped the way society perceives men and boys? And I agree with a lot of our speakers. Anytime you wake up in Kenya specifically, in the morning there will be a show of women and girls. In the afternoon, the president is doing something for women and girls. In the evening, members of parliament are talking about women and girls. So how does that change the way the entire society talks about girls and women? Because every time their problems are brought forth, the media picks it up, amplifies it, then it goes to parliament and they realize every single day there are issues of girls and women. Can we make policies that will actually get women and girls from this problem? Ignoring that maybe the same problem that are talking about, then boys and men could be suffering even more. But the fact that the media chooses to be biased for one gender against another one, then it means we kind of lose in between. The other thing that I would really want us to talk about is, does money or does funding or does donor, does resources shape what goes into the media? We all know that 80% of all gender funding in Africa is for girls and women. Programs and projects. It therefore means that anytime a media person, because everybody is looking for money, especially in this continent of ours. So anytime you call someone and tell them, I want you to feature this particular program for girls and women, then the next thing they're going to ask you, how much facilitation are you willing to give for you to be aired on prime time? How many of our NGOs that actually focus on boys and men do not have resources to facilitate media personnel to air our problems on prime time? Very few of us can even afford. So it's there for me, resources have a way of actually making people decide what to air and what not to air. And I think that is also an area that we also need to go back and ask ourselves, who owns 80-90% of funding that actually goes across the globe? It is men. So I think we need to kind of take two steps behind and ask ourselves, and allow me to use the word men, me included, because I mean this is what I do, and of course I'm a woman. But I'm asking, what is it that the donors see that their money needs to go here and not here? And yet, they actually acknowledge that there are issues of boys and men, but they don't want to fund it. So the whole thing goes round and you end up losing a lot of time. The other thing that I would also want to highlight is the issue of, look at the United Nations. United Nations calendar, we have International Day of Zero Tolerance to female genital mutilation. February 11th, International Day of Women's and Girls Science. March 18th, International Women's Day. June 23rd, August 9th, International Day of Solidarity with the Struggle of Women in South Africa and Namibia. October 11th, International Day of the Girl Child. October 15th, International Day of Rural Women. November 25th, International Day for Eliminating of Violence Against Women. None talks about men. If United Nations does not even recognize the existence and the sacrifice of boys and men in the entire world, what these guys have done, it leaves a lot of things to be desired. We actually in a position where we need to rethink of how do we approach these things going forward. First things first, if I as a woman can have about 6 days recognized by United Nations and none that is recognized for boys and men, bearing in mind the sacrifices they've done in this world, I think something is terribly, terribly wrong. So, and of course, we all know, somebody has talked about suicide, somebody has talked about fatherlessness, somebody has talked about a lot of mental issues. If you look at my slide number 7, we talk about boys and men are usually at more risk of succumbing to vices such as illiteracy, abject poverty, dysfunctional families, COVID. We had a crisis in Kenya during COVID where a lot of young men, boys, left their house because there was so much pressure. There is no food, their families are quarreling, and the best part, the boys would actually leave home. So we had a lot of street boys in the city because of COVID. But none of the media talks about that. But they would talk about girls getting pregnant, girls being abused, and nobody talks about every 10 kids you find on the street. Actually, during COVID, 9 were actually boys. So those are things that we really need to think and reflect and agree and acknowledge that it is us who might have the problem. It is us because at the end of the day, people will argue and say, men are actually leaders, men are actually on these media stations. So how are we complaining about coverage, yet it is you guys who own these media? There's something that I think, I don't know whether it is Father X or it was DeMarco who was talking about. How do we create our own media? And I think the movement of boys and men is actually growing. India are doing very well. Kenya is there. Nigeria is there. South Africa is there. Can we, with all the resources we have, it might not be much, but all the resources and the network we have, can we pour into it and create our own media? Let us not take back and decide, no, since they are not taking care of us, since they are not taking us, showing our, during prime time, what we need to do, can we take what they say, the law into our own hands and create our own media? Remember, media will always go where they'll make an impact, where they'll make money, and where they'll trend. Can we make our stories trend? Can we pour in our content so that anytime you go to Google and you talk about mental health, it doesn't come mental health on women and girls. If you talk about the gender-based violence, even right now, if you go to Google and say gender-based violence, you'll find all sorts of research that talks about gender-based violence against girls and women. Can we create our own media? Can we create our own content that any single boy out there or man will actually find it very useful to even propel their own agenda? So those are some of the questions that I've asked. Question 1 was, what role has players of men and boys play in creating content on boys and men for media consumption? 2, how often has players of men and boys do we create space for each other in the media sector? If you own a media house, can you invite people who are in the space of boys and men, which hardly happens? Now, question 3, how often do funders who are mostly male intentionally give donations to players of men and boys to amplify their work? Can some of us who have the resources bring in funders, international organizations into a room for breakfast and talk to them about issues of boys and men? We look for opportunities from these funders so that we actually amplify our voices. Question number 4, are we willing to do something about it by owning our own space and pushing our agenda far and wide? And I think from all the speakers that have talked today, I can actually confidently say that we are taking this and we'll actually create our own space. And by the time the media realizes what is done, they'll actually be knocking to us to appear into their stations. I think that is basically what I had, and I'm happy to be part of this movement. Thank you all.